I want to look this morning, very early in the morning, at the incapacity of Rachel Reeves, the ever-expanding economic headache that is UK inflation, and more importantly perhaps the seeming incapability of Rachel Reeves in managing it. Incapability Reeves. And inflation has now reached 3%, the highest in 10 months, and apparently we were all supposed to expect this. But here's the thing, expected or not, it's certainly not a positive. And if it was expected, why wasn't it mitigated? Why weren't we told? Let's establish the facts. Inflation in the UK was sitting at a comfortable 1.7% in September 2004. A few months later it's 3%. Core inflation, which strips out food and energy, is at 3.7%. Services inflation, which the Bank of England watches like a hawk, has jumped to 5%. In short, price pressures are back and they're bringing misery with them, and this is on the back of a cost of living crisis. So what's driving this? A cocktail of airfares, food costs, and most controversially, private school fees, which have surged nearly 13% due to Labour's government's VAT imposition. It's a policy designed to make education more fair, but instead it's hammering middle-class families up and down the country with sudden, unavoidable costs, and it's driven up inflation. So much for economic foresight. Now, Rachel Reeves has declared that getting more money in people's pocket is her top priority. How? If inflation is spiralling out of control, how is that possible? The government has introduced tax hikes, including the 25 billion increase in employers' national insurance contributions from April. And we're told that employers are now determined to get rid of staff or to stop employing more staff because of the danger of the amount of money that's going to be going out in that new national insurance contribution hike. There's no growth strategy there. It's just sound bites. And Reeves insists she's taking on the blockers to get Britain building again. Well, what I see is still sluggish economic growth, 0.1% in the first quarter of 2024, in the last quarter of 2024, high wage growth feeding inflation, businesses increasingly uneasy about what comes next. To quote Mel Stride, her shadow counterpart, Labour was warned that its borrowing, spending and tax spree would drive up inflation, and here we are. Inflation up. The Bank of England, which has been gearing up for rate cuts, now faces a dilemma. Do they cut as planned, despite inflation being higher than expected, or do they hold steady, inflicting more pain on mortgage holders and businesses? Markets have already scaled back the chances of a March rate cut. Andrew Bailey, ever the cautious figure, warns of a weak growth government, a weak growth environment. There's certainly a weak growth government too, but insists on a gradual and careful approach. And the irony, of course, is that Labour's policies, VAT on schools, tax hikes, regulatory changes, are exacerbating inflation while simultaneously throttling the economy's ability to grow. If the government wants to cool inflation, it must stop overheating costs. It simply cannot rely on the Bank of England to play firefighter. So, zooming out, the UK's inflation woes are not occurring in a vacuum. And you can't say this was expected if people don't expect it. If the Bank of England didn't expect it. The US and the Eurozone are also dealing with price pressures, but crucially, the UK remains in a weaker position. The Bank of England's growth forecasts have been slashed. Consumer confidence is low. Reeves' strategy or lack of strategy seems to be ride the storm rather than proactively addressing the underlying issues. So, at what point does a government take responsibility? At what point do we stop hearing inflation is expected to rise when people seem surprised that it has, and start hearing actual solutions? Inflation is not just a statistic. It's the difference between families affording essentials and businesses being able to plan for the future. And the current government inherited challenges, certainly, but Rachel Reeves' economic approach, raising taxes, increasing costs, offering little in the way of genuine growth initiatives, is proving to be part of the problem rather than part of the solution. A chancellor cannot simply expect inflation to rise and then act surprised when it does. We need leadership, not passive commentary. And otherwise, this government's economic credibility is going to erode faster than the value of the pound in the face of Reeves' tax and spend economics. This government's credibility is already eroding. This chancellor's credibility has already gone. Why? Because she cannot be trusted. Why? Because she cannot be trusted to tell the truth. Why? So she says, oh, this was expected. And then other people say, no, it wasn't expected. Who are we going to believe? The chancellor who lies on her CV, or the professionals who get on with the job? And the chancellor who lies on her CV is the person who's supposed to be doing something for the country. She was elected to sort things out. She was elected to fix the cost of living crisis. What's she done? She's made things worse.